All right, the history we'll be getting into in this series of lessons has long-lasting ramifications that will affect the culture in Israel, even in the days of Jesus. And the history that we'll be covering is also going to have long-lasting ramifications on the Bible issue, as we'll see in a couple weeks, and end-time prophecy is also extremely relevant in regards to the things that we're looking at with the history of the Grecian Empire after the death of Alexander the Great. So pay close attention to the history that we'll be covering in these lessons because it will be important, all right? So I'll be live streaming on Sermon Audio and also YouTube, and you can watch this lesson and over 100 others on Sermon Audio. Just type in Matt Crane in the search bar. You can find that there. I'll be live streaming, I'll also be playing these lessons on Final Fight Bible Radio at 8 o'clock a.m. and 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time. So if you haven't downloaded the Final Fight Bible Radio app, I encourage you to do so and listen to a lot of great Christian music, Bible-believing preaching and teaching, King James Bible-believing preaching and teaching, mind you. And you'll get a lot of good stuff on there. If you enjoy this content, share these lessons with your friends and family. And if you'd like to support the ministry of Final Fight Bible Radio and or myself, you can do so through Final Fight Bible Radio on the Donate tab. You can do so on the Donate tab on the Sermon Audio page or the Donate link at the bottom of this YouTube page. All right? And thank you for that. All right, so today's lesson is going to be heavy with history, and I'm going to be explaining what happened after the death of Alexander and how his kingdom was split up. Daniel chapter 11, verse 4 mentions the split up of the kingdom. But verse 5 in Daniel chapter 11, if you open your Bibles, go to Daniel chapter 11, and if you look at verse 4 and verse 5 right there, in between those two verses, there's roughly 50 years. Okay, so about 50 years takes place. And the things that take place in verse 5 and onward all stem from the melee that happened between verse 4 and verse 5. So if you see at verse 5, you see a little paragraph sign there. Basically, that is a 50-year time gap right there. And what happens in those 50 years is extremely important to the rest of the history of what's going to happen. So we need to cover that material there so that the rest of the chapter you'll have a context as to what's going on, and it will really help your understanding of Daniel chapter 11. So, as a disclaimer up front, there's not going to be a lot of scripture in this lesson. There's not going to be a lot of verse-by-verse explanation or scripture teaching, okay? Today's lesson is mostly a history lesson, but it's very important and it's very pertinent to the Bible. And as most of you know, most of my lessons, I've got lots of scripture in them and things like that. I don't normally do a lesson with hardly any Bible in it, but because of the importance of the events that happened between verse 4 and verse 5, I'm going to take the time this morning to cover those things. So there's your disclaimer up front. All right, so last week I spoke about Alexander III of Macedon's rise to power and how he conquered the entire Persian Empire within 3 years. Now let's just face it, Andrew Tate's got nothing on Alexander. All right? Even with his big inflated ego, as big as he has, he's got nothing on Alexander. All right? Horizontally speaking, as in not taking God and heaven into account, just as far as this world is concerned and humanity is concerned, Alexander III of Macedon was truly an incredible human being in terms of military accomplishments. I mean, militarily speaking, Alexander truly was the GOAT. He was, as the Bible even likens him as, that GOAT there in Daniel chapter 8. He was the greatest of all time up until that point in terms of military generals and in terms of land area that he had conquered. Nobody even compared to Alexander the Great up until that time. Genghis Khan, later on in history, will end up taking more geographical territory than even Alexander did, which is pretty amazing. But up until this time in history, there's no one matches Alexander in terms of military generals and what he was able to accomplish in the amount of time he was able to accomplish it. All right. So, anyways, Alexander III of Macedon, or as history records him as Alexander the Great, he attacked Persia in 334 BC. He became king of Macedon in 336, and Macedon's right up here, the northern area of Greece. You remember his father, Philip III, had created the United States of Greece with the Congress at Corinth, and created basically the United States of Greece. Washington, D.C. was, for all practical purposes, Pella in Philippi, and Philip III was the president, if you will, the Abraham Lincoln of the Grecian Empire at that time until he was assassinated, and then in 336 BC, his son Alexander becomes king. All right, so in 334 BC, Alexander attacks the Persian Empire. He defeats. Markers not working. He defeats Darius, King Darius, in 331. Ends up taking over the Persian Empire. I believe it was Darius III. Yeah, he takes over Darius III. That's not the Darius in your Bible. Okay, there's a couple Dariuses that are mentioned in Ezra and also in the book of Daniel. The Darius that Alexander conquered is not that Darius, either one of those. Okay, this is Darius III, way over in 331 BC. Alexander conquers him. Darius III was the final king of the Persian Empire, taken out by Alexander, so therefore Alexander becomes the de facto ruler of the empire. All right, and then Alexander ends up dying a few years later in 323 BC. All right, he dies in Babylon, and he dies at age 33. So Alexander becomes king at age 20, attacks the Persian Empire at age 22, defeats the entire Persian Empire by the time he's 25 years old. I mean, that's incredible. You think about where you were at age 25 and what you were doing, playing video games or, working at Wendy's or I don't know, whatever. But 25 years old, he conquers the entire known world. All right, and then at age 33, he dies. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Daniel chapter 11, verse 3. It says, "And a mighty king," in the Bible, that's referring to the Alexander of Macedon, "shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion." His dominion was from Greece all the way to India, "and will do according to his will." All right, in verse 4. "And when he, Alexander III of Macedon, shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven." As I pointed out last week, that's a figure of speech in regards to all directions, okay? And because we're going to talk about his kingdom being divided up to the final four, but at the beginning it wasn't like that. So in the beginning, his kingdom was divided up to all the winds of heaven. And it says, "And not to his posterity, baby Alex IV, as we'll talk about, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those." All right, so it says, "and not to his posterity." All right, so I want to add a little detail that I didn't mention last week, and I found out more in my studies this week. But Alexander didn't have any children at the time of his death. At least that's what I told you last week. But his wife, Roxana, she was pregnant with a baby at the time that Alexander died. They didn't know if it was a boy or a girl in her womb because they weren't able to do ultrasounds at that time, obviously. Okay, so legally, yes, that is correct. Alexander did not have any children legally at the time of his death. However, Alexander technically did have one other son, and his name was Hercules, and he was 4 years old at the time of Alexander's death. But the technicality here is that that baby, that child Hercules, was born to a woman named Barsine, who was a concubine of Alexander's, and therefore Hercules was not in line for the throne. All right, so Alexander, like I mentioned last week, had a lot of women, a lot of concubines, but he only had 3 actual wives, 3 queens, okay? And so legally, in order to be in line for the throne, it can't be a son of a concubine, all right? Hercules was one of his children, but was not in line for the throne. Roxana was the wife of Alexander. She was a queen, and so her child that was going to be born would be in line for the throne so long as it was a boy. All right, so for what it's worth, there's some confusion historically as to who exactly Barsine was. Some say that she was, Barsine is another name for Statiera, who was one of Alexander's other 3 wives. But the problem with Barsine and Statiera being the same person is, number one, she would have been, Statiera or Barsine would have been a queen, and therefore Hercules would have been in line for the throne. However, no one at the Council of Babylon even looked in Hercules' direction in terms of him being the next king of Greece after Alexander dies, which implies that Barsine and Statiera were 2 completely different women. And the reason why I point this out is it is kind of important, and as far as the integrity of Scripture goes, is Barsine and Statiera, they're not the same woman, even though some historians, not all, some historians say that they were the same woman. They can't be. The historians that say they were 2 different people they're the ones that have to be correct. Historically, it wouldn't have made sense, because otherwise, if Hercules was in line for the throne, they would have made him the next king of Greece. All right, but he wasn't. So Statiera, the other reason why Statiera and Barcine are two different women is because after Alexander died, Roxana had Statiera killed. Okay, so there's no, if she had killed Statiera, she also would have obviously killed her son Hercules, if they're the same person. All right, so again, that implies that Statiera is a completely different woman from Barcine. All right, but also Roxana, Barcine, and Hercules are all alive years later in Greece under the protection of the regent of Macedonia. Okay, and all this information is covered in Ussher's Annals of the World. But what that means is that Roxana killed Statiera, and that Barcine was still alive with Hercules. They're two completely different people. Now, that might just be irrelevant trivia to most people, but if you ever get to studying this subject, that little detail is going to be important. So anyway, I had to throw that in there. Okay, so moving on. At the time of Alexander's death, the only potential heir was still in Roxana's womb, and the other option is his next of kin, Philip III Aridaeus. He was mentally handicapped, and he was not capable of ruling the empire. So Greece has a big mess on their hands. They've got a baby that's coming. They don't even know if it's going to be a boy. And then the only other person that's in line for the throne is a mental handicapped. He can't do anything. So they're in this bad situation. And by the way, the reason why it's suspected that Philip III Aridaeus was a mental handicapped is because Alexander's mother, Olympias, at one time had tried to make sure that there were no other rivals to Alexander to the throne. So she tried to poison or drug Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother. She tried to kill him, and it was unsuccessful. And it ended up just causing the kid to be mentally handicapped for the rest of his life. So you have all this intrigue within the palace going on, and people trying to kill each other to make sure their kid gets the throne and all that stuff. All right, so nevertheless, you have to consider how different history would have been had Philip III Aridaeus been completely healthy and completely normal. He would have become the next king of Greece, no problem. You know, Alexander dies, the brother becomes the king. But because of this one action of Olympias years prior that caused Philip III to be mentally handicapped, because of that little detail of history, it caused the things that Daniel prophesied to take place. And if Olympias hadn't caused Philip III to become a mental handicap, then everything Daniel said in chapter 11 wouldn't have happened. Or at least you could theorize that it wouldn't have happened. History would have been completely different. So what I'm getting at is these little details of history and the little directions that history goes is very interesting, because if it hadn't happened, everything would have been completely different. All right? So after Alexander's death, the Grecian Empire was a mess, and some believed that the scepter of Greece should be given to Philip III Aridaeus, even though he's mentally handicapped. Some stated, well, he's blood. He's next in line for the throne, so he should be king. And others argued, no, Roxana is pregnant, obviously. She's got a baby coming, so if it's a boy, the baby boy should be the king of Greece, even though it's a baby. You know, so there's a lot of bickering and fighting. But regardless of who the crown technically went to, regardless of whether it went to Philip III Aridaeus or baby Alex IV, either way, neither one of them were capable of ruling this empire. So what should be done with the largest empire the world had ever seen up until that point? Who could command such an empire that big? All right, so that was the problem that the generals over in Babylon were trying to figure out. Well, ultimately it was decided that the best chance for a lasting peace within the empire was to have a mutually agreed division of the kingdom amongst the Gentiles. Amongst the generals, to divide the kingdom among the generals. Why do I keep saying that? What's interesting, again, is Daniel prophesied all of this 200 years before it happened. Every single detail that Daniel prophesied happened exactly as he said. All right? And so the kingdom's going to be divided among the generals of the military. And that decision was made at the Council of Babylon in 323 BC. All right? Alexander had died in Babylon in 323 BC, so right after his death, the generals get together and they're deciding, okay, what are we going to do? All right, so at the Council of Babylon, it was decided, all right, well, 12 generals will govern the regions to the west, and we'll have 12 generals govern the regions to the east of the Euphrates. Basically, they divided up that way. There was no less than 24 different predominant regions with governors over those regions in the areas. All right. So I'm not going to elaborate on all 24 of those different guys. It's not necessary, but there are a few key players that it would be good for you to get acquainted with. All right. So in no particular order, I'm going to introduce you to a lot of these generals that started to take over and what happened with these guys. All right. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is Ptolemy I Soter. All right. He was one of Alexander's personal bodyguards, and at the Council of Babylon, Ptolemy I Soter was the guy who suggested that the kingdom be divided between the generals, all right? That was kind of his idea. So Ptolemy I Soter, at the Council of Babylon, it was decided, okay, well, you will be the governor or the satrap. You'll be the ruler of Egypt. You'll take the province of Egypt and Cyrenia. You'll deal with that area. That'll be yours to govern, all right? And by the way, there's going to be a lot of Ptolemies, there's going to be a lot of Seleucuses, and a lot of repeating names, unfortunately. And so in order to help with the confusion and so you don't get these guys all mixed up, a lot of times I'm just going to refer to these guys by their full name, even though it's tedious. I'm going to do that just so you can remember who is who and not get them all mixed up, because there are some duplicate names and it gets confusing. All right, so another little detail is the title Soter, Ptolemy I Soter. Soter is a title. It means savior, and it's something that a title that he was given years later. And so technically he's not named Ptolemy I Soter at the Council of Babylon. But I'm not going to worry about those technical chronological details in this study. It's just going to create confusion. So I'm just going to call him Ptolemy I Soter. You know, even though he didn't get the title until years later, who cares? All right, Ptolemy I Soter. All right. So another thing, as we're going through this, keep in mind that even though the Grecian Empire gets divided up, this whole empire, with all of its different provinces, is still considered as the Grecian Empire as far as God and the Bible is concerned. Keep in mind that all of the people that are ruling these provinces are Greeks, okay? Ptolemy wasn't an African. Ptolemy wasn't an Egyptian. Ptolemy was a Macedonian, a Greek, who was ruling the Egyptians, okay? And that's going to be important to remember, because you remember in the image of Daniel chapter 2, Greece, in that giant image that Daniel saw, Greece was the belly and the upper thighs of the image, right? And the next empire after Greece was the Roman Empire, the Roman iron legs. Remember that in Daniel chapter 2? Okay, so it goes from Greece to Rome. It doesn't go from Greece to Syria or Greece to Egypt to Rome. There is no kingdom or empire in between Greece and Egypt. As far as God is concerned, everything from Alexander all the way till 30 BC when Rome takes over, everything in this 300-year time period of history is considered the Grecian Empire, even though, as we're studying this, Greece up here, literal Greece, a lot of times has very little power in regards to the rest of the empire. All right, even though Washington, D.C. is up here in Macedonia, Greece doesn't have very much power in the rest of the empire and what's going on. The two main powerhouses are going to be the Seleucids that are going to be up here and the Ptolemies down here. But remember that even though you're reading about the Assyrians and the Egyptians fighting it out, they're all still Greeks fighting with each other. This is still the Greek Empire. So that's an important detail that you need to remember, especially, again, with the continuity of Scripture and the validity of the prophecies here. All right, so next guy is Seleucus I Nicator. All right, he was also one of Alexander's military officers, and at the Council of Babylon, he was appointed as the governor of Babylon. All right, I'm going to take out Alexander III because he's dead. All right. So Seleucus I Nicator, he's given the region of Babylon to be the governor over. All right. Then you have Eumenes. Eumenes, all right, he was one of Alexander's generals, and he was appointed the area of Cappadocia. All right. And then you have Lysimachus. Lysimachus was a bodyguard of Alexander, and he was assigned to the area of Thrace. Okay. And then you have Antigonus I Monothalamus, which is a Greek word that refers to the mythology of the Cyclopses, the one-eyed giants. And so basically, Antigonus I Monothalamus had lost his eye in a battle at some point, and so he got that title Monothalamus. They called him the Cyclops. All right, so I'll refer to it the same way just because it's easier to say than Monothalamus, and also it's easier to remember. Oh, this is the Cyclops. This is the guy, the Patch the pirate, the guy with the one eye, the Cyclops warrior. All right, so he was a tough dude. He lost an eye in battle at some point, and he was one of Alexander's generals who never lost a battle until his final battle where he died. All right, and he was appointed as the governor of Phrygia, Lycia, and Pamphylia. Okay, so he was appointed governor over there. And then the next three guys that I'm going to mention were the chief of Alexander's generals. So you know how David had his mighty men, but then he had his top three, the chiefest among the mighty men? It's kind of the same thing with Alexander. He had a bunch of generals, but then there's three guys that were basically the top of the top. So the first one of those three guys is Antipater. All right, Antipater, if you remember, he's not in Babylon at this time. He was appointed as regent of Greece and Macedonia before Alexander even left. Remember, when Alexander left Greece, he had to leave somebody in charge of things back home, and that was Antipater, a friend of the family. So he's in charge of Greece. He's the regent of Greece at the nation's capital. All right, and then you have this guy named Craterus. All right, Craterus, he was one of Alexander's generals, and he was a very close friend of the family, very close friend to Alexander, very respected in the Grecian Empire. And at one point during Alexander's military campaign, as he's coming into Persia, the Greeks have been fighting for a couple years, and some of the people are worn out. And at one point in the battles, some of Alexander's not generals, but a lot of Alexander's army started to get sick and tired of fighting. They wanted to go back home. And so there started to be this rebellion of his troops that began to foment. And so what Alexander did is he decided he would send back a lot of his veteran Greek soldiers, let them go back to Greece, and Craterus would be the guy who would lead them back. And the plan was, this had happened, I think, in 332 BC, I believe, is when this is going on. They're over here by the Orontes River and things like this. And so this rebellion is starting to foment. And so rather than make these soldiers come with him, Alexander says, okay, fine, you guys can go back home. Craterus is going to take you home. All right, and when Craterus gets back, the plan is that Craterus is going to replace Antipater, and Antipater is going to come meet up with Alexander with a new fresh batch of military recruits. All right, well, that's the plan. Well, things didn't exactly go as planned. Alexander inconveniently died, and that happened while Craterus was heading back. Okay, Alexander dies, and then Craterus hears of Alexander's death, and so he books it, and he gets back to Greece in order to protect the royal family. Because anytime there's a death of a king or something like that, enemies see it as an opportunity to capitalize and take control. And it's a good thing that he got back quickly, because that's exactly what happened. Athens, they didn't like to be ruled by the Macedonians. Now remember, this is the United States of Greece, but there's still some skirmishes, there's still some discontent there. The Greeks don't like to be ruled over by anybody, and all of these little cities are different city-states. And so Athens, they're like, hey, Alexander's dead, let's take out the Macedonian government, let's throw off our rulers and be done with this whole United States of Greece thing. We want to be independent and sovereign. All right, so they head up and they're going to take out, they're going to attack Macedonia. And so Antipater and Craterus fight the Athenians and put down the rebellion and are able to maintain the stability of the empire. All right, so meanwhile, at the Council of Babylon, while all this is going on, it's decided, okay, you know what? We're going to have Antipater remain as the regent of Greece and Macedonia, and Craterus, his job is that he is going to be the guardian of the royal family. Okay, so that's his job. So the only problems with that plan was this. Number one, if Craterus is supposed to be the guardian of the royal family, he's all the way in Greece, except the royal family is over here in Babylon. All right, so the royal family being Roxanne, Philip III Aridaeus, and also baby Alex the Fourth. All right, so Roxana and her baby is the royal family and the mentally handicapped brother of Alexander. So Craterus' job is to be a bodyguard for these people, but they're way over here and he's way up here. So how's that supposed to work? All right, so what was decided is Perdiccas, who I'll get to in just a second, he said, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'll take care of the royal family until I can transfer them to Craterus' care. All right? So then the second thing that was a problem is Perdiccas, he's like the top of the three, essentially. He's made regent of the empire. All right? So what that means is Perdiccas is basically, he's the substitute ruler of the entire kingdom of Greece. And all the generals are accountable to him. All right? So the problem with that is that kind of clashed with Antipater. Because if this is Washington, D.C. up here, and this is the capital of the empire, and Antipater's over the capital, technically shouldn't Antipater be also over the entire empire, technically? So now you have this kind of clash between Perdiccas' role and Antipater's role, and nobody's really sure whose role is who. It's starting to get a little bit problematic. And so some confusion is already starting to brew, which is going to boil over into some major problems here shortly. All right, so let's talk about Perdiccas. Perdiccas was Alexander's top cavalry general. And if you will recall, Perdiccas was one of the bodyguards who had killed the assassin of Alexander's father. Remember, King Philip II was assassinated, and Perdiccas was one of the men who caught up with the assassin and killed him. All right, so Perdiccas was one of the top guys. He was one of Alexander's top guys. And Perdiccas was a major loyalist to Alexander, and he was among the faction who thought that everyone should wait to see if Roxana's baby was going to be a boy, and if it was, that boy would be king, would be made king. But in the meantime, Roxana, she would be queen, and Perdiccas would be the regent of the empire, just kind of filling in until the baby got old enough to become king. That was the mindset that Perdiccas had. He was a loyalist to the family. He wanted the Alexander family to be king. At least at this time, he didn't seem to have any ambitions for the empire himself. He was just filling in until the baby could be a little bit older. All right, but the thing is, not everybody was a fan of this plan for a number of reasons. Number one, some of the military generals thought that Perdiccas was taking way too much power to himself, making himself the regent of the entire empire. And number two, others thought that Philip III Aridaeus, the half-brother of Alexander, should be made king, not Roxana's baby. And an avid advocate of Philip III Aridaeus becoming king was another military commander named Meleager. All right, Meleager. And he argued that the king of the Grecian Empire should be a full-blooded Greek, and that the king of Greece should not have the mingled blood of a conquered people. Okay, so that was his argument. Because here's the thing, Roxana was a princess of Bactria, of northern Afghanistan, essentially. So that's where she came from. And so this baby Alex IV, he was going to be part Greek and part Afghani, part Bactrian. And in those days, it wasn't called Afghanistan. But this baby's going to be part Greek, part Afghani. And he argued we shouldn't have a king of the Grecian Empire that's a half and half. He should be a full-blooded Greek, which Philip III Aridaeus was, even though he's a handicap. All right. So Perdiccas and Meleager, they started getting pretty heated at the Council of Babylon in regards to their arguing as to what plan they should go with and who should be, doing what and all this stuff. You have to understand that at this time, this is a argument of ideologies. Perdiccas, he doesn't care. Who cares if this baby is half and half? It's the son of Alexander. Alexander just conquered this empire. The baby should be king. But Meleager's saying, no, he's a half-breed. He can't be king. You see, this is an ideological thing that's going on here. So they come up, basically what happens is these guys start fighting so much that Meleager basically cusses out Perdiccas. He marches out of that council. And while the other governors are still talking about things, Meleager is starting to get the infantry behind him. And he's saying, listen, Perdiccas is trying to take over. He's trying to get a half-breed on the Grecian Empire. This is an abomination. And he's getting the soldiers all riled up. And he basically he basically makes a command he orders the execution of Perdiccas. He's like, if you're with me, let's kill Perdiccas. Yeah! And so the generals hear what's going on outside. Perdiccas comes out. He gets the cavalry behind him. And basically they're able to prevent a big war from happening, and everything kind of settles down. Okay, so you got the infantry versus the cavalry, and they're about to clash, and then finally everything gets settled down. And finally they say, okay guys, let's come up with a compromise. Let's compromise here. Let's go ahead and do this. How about we'll have both Philip III Aridaeus and the baby. They'll be co-rulers. If the baby ends up being a boy, we'll call it baby Alex IV, and Philip III and baby Alex IV, they'll just be co-rulers. How about? Not one or the other. And the second thing is, here's what we'll do. Rather than just having Perdiccas be the regent of the empire, we'll have both Perdiccas and Meleager be co-regents of the empire. So that was the solution that everybody finally agreed upon, and everybody was supposedly okay with. But as you can imagine, Perdiccas wasn't too excited about sharing authority with a guy who just tried to kill him. So everybody kind of disbands and goes their different ways, and Perdiccas pretends to kind of go along with this agreement for a little while. And then Roxana's baby is born. Sure enough, it's a boy. It's baby. They call it baby Alex IV. And so Perdiccas, he's glad about that, because that kind of goes with what he wanted anyway. He wanted the Alexander family to remain kings of the Grecian Empire. All right, so then what Perdiccas does is he befriends Philip III Aridaeus. And so now he's got Roxana, baby Alex, and Philip III Aridaeus on his side. And so once he does that, he has Meleager and all of his friends in the army executed. All right, so Perdiccas knocks out Meleager. All right, so the other Greek generals, now scattered throughout the provinces, they're not cool with what Perdiccas just did. Everybody had agreed to the decision of Meleager and Perdiccas sharing power, and now Perdiccas just killed his co-regent. A move that created a lot of suspicion among the other generals that what is Perdiccas trying to do? Is he trying to take over the entire empire for himself? Why doesn't he want to share power with Meleager? All right, so they're kind of getting suspicious of Perdiccas. Now maybe Perdiccas didn't want power for himself. Maybe that wasn't his motivation. But Perdiccas starts doing things that definitely don't look good. While Perdiccas is now the sole regent of the empire, he wants to hold the empire together. He knows the thing is huge. He knows there's a ton of different generals. He knows it's going to be hard enough trying to keep things together. So Perdiccas' attitude is, you know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to root out any of these Persian strongholds that are still within the empire. And there were a few Persian enemies that were still hanging out in this Cappadocia area. And so Perdiccas gets Eumenes and calls up Eumenes on the phone, and Antigonus I Cyclops on the phone, and he says, hey, I'm going to come up there, and we're going to take out the remainder of the Persian forces that are still there, because it's hard enough keeping this thing together. I don't need some Persians causing problems in the empire. That was his mentality. All right? So he calls these guys up and tries to get help. Eumenes is fine with it, but Antigonus I Cyclops, he doesn't like Perdiccas, and he's suspicious of him, and so he already knows that Perdiccas killed Meleager, so Antigonus is like, no way, I'm not helping that guy, I am out of here. And so he defies orders and goes up to Antipater and hangs out with him. Well, Perdiccas is thinking, that dirty little rat, here I'm the regent of the empire, now he's disobeying my direct commands to help me in this war against these Persian strongholds. All right, so this makes Perdiccas mad, and not only that, it makes Perdiccas mad at Antipater, because here Antipater is harboring this insubordinate general. Okay, so now Perdiccas is pretty upset with Antipater and Antigonus I Cyclops, and so what they end up deciding is Antipater says, you know what, calm down, Perdiccas, here's what we'll do. I'll have you marry my daughter, Nicaea. Okay, so Antipater tells Perdiccas, listen, you marry my daughter, and then everything will be fine. Now you have to understand that in those times, disputes between kingdoms were settled through marriages, through offering your opponent your daughter in marriage. That seems kind of weird if you have an enemy to give him your daughter, but that's how it worked in those days. In those days, daughters, everybody wanted a son, obviously, because of the strength and the next in line for the throne and things like that. But the thing is, daughters were good too because they could be used as bargaining chips, basically is how they work. Because basically by offering your daughter to your enemy, it's a gesture of goodwill. You know, both the families are now connected, so I don't want to attack you because my daughter's over there, and you don't want to attack me because I'm the father-in-law, and if you attack me, that's going to cause a problem in your marriage. Your wife is going to be all mad at you for attacking her dad. You know, so it kind of was a way to smooth things over. All right, so Antipater gives Perdiccas his daughter Nicaea, but shortly after the marriage, Perdiccas is given a better offer. He's given an offer he can't refuse. Basically what happens is Olympias, the mother of Alexander, sends Perdiccas an email and says, hey, how about you marry my daughter Cleopatra of Macedon? Now this Cleopatra, this is not the famous Cleopatra that you're thinking of. Alexander had a full-blooded sister named Cleopatra, who was a daughter of Philip II and King Philip II and Olympias. So he has this full-blooded sister named Cleopatra, and Olympias offers Cleopatra to Perdiccas. Now, Perdiccas saw this as a very strategic move, a very great opportunity for him, because Perdiccas is already the regent of the empire, and by marrying Alexander's sister, Cleopatra of Macedon, that could make him the true successor to the throne of Greece. You see, Philip III was handicapped, so he obviously couldn't rule. Baby Alex IV, he is only half Greek. I mean, I guess Meleager kind of had a point there. Here, Perdiccas, he's full-blooded Greek. Cleopatra of Macedon, she's full-blooded Greek, and by marrying Cleopatra, that would technically make Perdiccas the brother-in-law of Alexander, which would give him supremacy over Philip and baby Alex IV. So technically, that could make him arguably the king of the Grecian Empire. So Perdiccas sees this as an offer he can't refuse. He's thinking this is a checkmate. Oh man, this is my opportunity to become king, and then we won't have all these problems in the empire. We'll have a king, Greece will have a king, and the glory of Greece will be restored. All right? So he cancels his subscription to Antipater's daughter Nicaea. He kicks her to the curb. He gets engaged to Cleopatra, and this basically pisses off Nicaea's daddy Antipater, as you can imagine. And so this, again, is raising alarm bells as far as the generals of the Grecian Empire are concerned. They're thinking, what are you doing, Perdiccas? Are you trying to take over the empire? I mean, every single thing you're doing looks like is exactly what someone would do if they wanted to take over the entire empire for themselves. All right? So everybody's getting really suspicious of Perdiccas. Now, the final straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, was when Perdiccas arranged for the body of Alexander to be sent back home to Macedonia for a proper Grecian burial. All right, but while in transit, all right, so you got the body of Alexander, while it's in transit up to Macedonia, Ptolemy I Soter, he sends his guys up there, and they basically hijack the caravan and get the body of Alexander to come down to Memphis, and Ptolemy buries the body of Alexander somewhere in Egypt. It's a big mystery to this day where Alexander's body is buried. But Perdiccas, he's just furious against Ptolemy. He's like, how dare you? I'm trying to do this thing for the Grecian Empire, bury the god-man Alexander, his godlike body. I'm trying to bury it, and then you steal it? What is your problem? So Perdiccas is having a hard time keeping everybody under control. And he's getting more and more angry that people are defying his orders. And so he decides, I am going to march down into Egypt, and I am going to punish Ptolemy, and I'm going to take him out. All right, so Perdiccas starts heading down south. All right, so Perdiccas isn't doing himself any favors, okay? Even if his intentions were good, and he wanted to honor the Grecian Empire, honor the legacy of Alexander, keep the empire in check and under control, even if his intentions were good, everything he was doing was creating a lot of suspicion with the generals. Because not only did Perdiccas kill his co-regent Meleager, he's causing a bunch of problems with the provincial governors of Asia Minor. He refused Antipater's daughter Nicaea and got engaged to Alexander's sister, Cleopatra, and now he's starting a war with Ptolemy in Egypt. So as far as practically everyone was concerned, Perdiccas is out of control. All right? And so they perceive that he's trying to take over the entire empire. He's trying to become king himself, and this is unacceptable. This was not the agreement. Okay? So the Greek generals, they band together to put a stop to Perdiccas. All right? Now let me point out really quick this geographical nuisance to everybody who had ambitions to conquer this part of the world. Okay? You have this area here called the Taurus Mountains. This Taurus mountain range right here. And this area, this little lever right there becomes a major problem when you're trying to take over the entire empire for yourself. Okay, let's say that you were from this Mesopotamia area and you wanted to conquer the entire empire. All right, so if you're coming this way, you have to decide, do I go south and do I attack Ptolemy? Or do I go to the west and attack Greece and all the guys up here? Okay, well, if you decide to go this way, that means Ptolemy could come up and basically come up behind you, cut you in half, and then you're vulnerable to attack. You know, so if you go this way, somebody could get you this way. But if you decide to go south, these guys can cut you off this way. You know, and vice versa. If you go this way and you're attacking Babylon and the Eastern empires, well, now Ptolemy can sail up here and attack you in the back. You know, so you have all this. It's a really difficult situation the way the land is laid out here. And every single one of these kings, whenever they try to attack one, somebody else comes up from behind and tries to take advantage of their weakness. All right, so the best option you had really was, if you were going to attack an area, you need to make an alliance with the other guy, that the one who could exploit your weakness. You have to make an alliance with him, and then once you defeat your enemy up here, then you can fight with this guy and try to take his territory. So that's kind of the battles go back and forth all over the place, and when you realize how the game board is set up and the problems involved, you start to see some of the strategy involved in their attempts to take over. All right, so everybody at this time thinks Perdiccas is out of control and he has to be stopped. All right, so here's the alliances that end up forming. All right, to the west you have Team Antipater. Okay, you have Team Antipater, and on Antipater's team you have Craterus, you have Antigonus I Cyclops, and you have Ptolemy. He's also been sent for, and they say, hey, we need you on our side. So the main players on Team Antipater is Antipater, Craterus, Ptolemy I Soter, and Antigonus I Cyclops. All right, to the east, Team Perdiccas is Eumenes and Perdiccas. They're basically the main two guys that are on the same team. And you also have Seleucus I Nicator. All right, for the time being, he's on Perdiccas' team also. All right, so it's these three versus these four, basically. Lysimachus, I think he was involved, but he didn't really play much of a role. All right, at least at this time. All right, so let me point one last thing out, and we'll wrap things up for today. Eumenes was a very intellectual and noble Greek military man who was also a loyalist to the Grecian aristocracy. And he believed that Greece also should be ruled by the family of Alexander. So he and Perdiccas, you know, they had this mutual conviction along these lines. And they both saw that, as far as they were concerned, Perdiccas and Eumenes, they saw Antipater and his team as rebels against Greece and the Alexander dynasty. As far as these guys are concerned, these guys are rebels now, and they have to be stopped. They're trying to take over the Grecian Empire, these rebels, these mavericks. We got to take them out for the glory of Greece and for the glory of Alexander. These guys think Perdiccas is out of control and trying to take over the empire for himself. They see these guys as rebels, and so they're going to fight them. All right? So, like I said, a lot of this fighting has to do with ideology and belief as to who should inherit the power of the Grecian Empire. Now, later on, it became simply a matter of personal ambition and lust for power, but initially, all these guys on both sides thought that they were doing the right thing for Greece. As Ptolemy I Soter would say later on, they were not fighting for pay, but for honor, and to determine who should wear the garland, the symbol of power, authority, and glory. All right, so each provincial governor had their different convictions as to how Greece should be run, and each one of them thought that their conviction was the right conviction, and each one of them thought that he himself would be the one who could rule the Grecian Empire the best and be the best one for Greece. And so consequently, all of this can only be settled one way, and that is by war. All right? So that's the layout of the division, the initial division of the Grecian Empire. And the things we'll cover next week will be the wars that happened between these men and how the Grecian Empire finally is divided into those 4 main sections, exactly as Daniel said. And again, the history of all these guys fighting with each other, even though it's a lot of names, we're going to be eliminating some of the names next week. But everything that's happening at this time right here and where the chips end up falling as far as who gets what kingdoms is going to be extremely relevant to the history of what happens, the rest of what happens in Daniel chapter 11. So I hope this lesson was a blessing, even though it was history. I hope you learned something, and God bless you. Have a good week.